The agenda this week: tally the costs of medical over-testing, tapped into the federal New Democrats' excitement over a new leader, and accounted for ties between terrorist groups and business interests. The agenda's Week in Review begins sizing up the cultural significance of what's affectionately known as CanLit.
In the 1960s, the time which this book is set, Canada's at 95% of European origin. And that, not surprisingly, is reflected in the literature and the authors that it creates. It's a very different country today and a very different literature today. At the time, the main minority literature or minority view that English Canada struggled to incorporate was French Canada. That's really the one.
And it stopped there,
and women writers. And to some extent, it really doesn't take off until the 80s, but Indigenous writers, it starts then, but it's really, that also isn't until later. But it's French Canada is the one where you see publishers trying to do things like publish more books in translation, in both French and English Canada, and mainstream magazines running articles about French Canadian writers. That was the minority that they were more conscious of then.
But I think that's the issue, right? Who are we conscious of? I think there's this sense that and we're looking at it through today's lens, right? And so for me, it's just when we get really nostalgic about CanLit's glory days and we get really, those were the great ones, right? That's the problem. I think there's all sorts of reasons why that happened. There was consciousness that wasn't there. And that's where we have to be careful about, you know, celebrating it as the great days, because we weren't aware of people who were here and people who mattered.
Did this CanLit period affect you as a writer or a poet at all?
Well, I mean, in my years of undergraduate study, we all got that CanLit. And again, I was one of maybe two black people or minorities in the classroom.
Which classroom?
Well, I went to York University. I studied creative writing there and professional writing. But I grew up in St. Lucia. And I moved here in the early 2000s. And what I brought with me was very different than what I had to study. And for me, I just found it to be a remarkable opportunity to see my experiences revealed in other people's knowledges, in other people's experiences, but I wanted that for myself as well. And that opportunity was not there in any significant way.
Did CanLit, to you, feel like it was, was it interested in what you had to say, or was it only interested in telling you what it was about?
That was basically it. Yeah, telling me what it was about and giving me a sense of what Canadian literature ought to be, rather than what it was becoming, you know, and having that consciousness is a kind of presence of mind that allows you to see when things are organically moving in a certain direction, so that you're not trying always to bring it back onto some rails that it needs to depart from.
Fair criticisms here, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes not seeing yourself in the literature can be as productive as seeing yourself.
How so?
Well, David Cheri DiNovo's got a big book out right now called Brother, and he gave an interview for the Globe and Mail a little while ago where he talked about reading Robertson Davies' Fifth Business for the first time. And he loved it. He really genuinely enjoyed reading the book.
But he couldn't have written about it.
It's not his place. Exactly. It's not his story. Yeah. But that tells him, you know, that in a way that creates an opening for him, right? There's a story there to be written. Thompson Highway says the same thing about when he took his first CanLit class, that he's reading all that he wants. Where's my Manawaka, right? I'll create my own Manawaka. So not sometimes, to some extent, that is the story of Canadian literature itself. That is, when Margaret Atwood came up, she's got a blank page in front of her. Mordecai Richler said that when he started writing, the only people who had been there before him, the only things that had been there before him were Snow and Mazo de la Broche, right? And, you know, and that can be quite liberating. Imagine being an American writer growing up in the 60s, and you got Faulkner standing over top of you, right? Not having those things. Yeah. I mean, we're talking in a way about two different things now, right? The absence of the voices from the story is one thing, but I'm just, you know, the absence can also be productive for writers.
Well, and I think absolutely. I think in the sense that I read Lawrence Hill's Blackberry Sweet Juice, and I, for the first time, thought all the things that I had felt in high school that I thought made me crazy, right? That
like
I
what?
wasn't black enough, that, in order to be black, I had to listen to hip hop music and, all these sorts of things. Couldn't watch hockey. There was all these things that I sort of carried in my body because of what I saw on TV and what I read in books and things like that. And when I read Lawrence Hill's Blackberry Sweet Juice, I realized that the things I felt and thought, the angers and the frustrations I had, I wasn't alone. There were other people who thought similarly, maybe differently, and it became a fire for writing. It became, I read Janet Sears' Harlem Duet, and I realized I could be angry and I could write from that angry place, and then I could shape it, and certainly that's infused much of my writing. I'm so grateful for that fire. My big argument is I just wish I had read those books earlier. I wish I had been awakened in high school as opposed to in university. I wish those things had been built into the curriculum so that I felt validated by the institution of my school and the education system. Many of the things I found on my own, or I found through my undergraduate studies.
Did it prevent you from embracing, I don't know what, the culture, the country, all of our institutions, because you didn't have that experience as early as others, maybe?
For sure. I for a long time didn't know if I was really Canadian. I didn't know if I could be Canadian. I remember that Molson Canadian commercial where he says, all these things that make us Canadian. I was like, I don't identify with any of those things. And does that mean I'm Canadian? I was born here. Born here. My parents were American, but I just didn't quite understand what it looked like to be a black female Canadian. I didn't have very many examples of that I saw on TV, that I heard in interviews and discussions.
Can I embarrass you for a second? Your dad, who was a childhood hero of mine, having quarterbacked the Hamilton Tiger Cats to the Grey Cup Championship in 1972, was this, he may have been an, so-called import American quarterback to Hamilton, but he was as quintessentially Canadian as anything I could remember. Yeah. So it's funny that you have these feelings when I certainly never thought that way about your pop.
Well, and to be honest, the Canadian Football League...
Chuck Ely is his name.
The Canadian Football League became a really important place where I became identified as Canadian, right? It became the space where my dad was welcomed, he was idolized, he was treated so well there.
Yes, ma'am.
But when I was on my own and in school, and my friends had no idea, about the Canadian Football League and certainly about Chuck Ely, I was left to sort of figure that out on my own.
This is a complex issue, and it ultimately doesn't just come down to money, right? I think that the Choosing Wisely campaign is not just about saving money, it's actually about providing more appropriate care for people. And when these tests are ordered, it's not, I think, that physicians are looking for ways to waste money. It's that in many cases they may either not understand the clinical guidelines that would say that a test is necessary or not necessary, not be sure whether in this particular case it's necessary or unnecessary, or simply really think they're doing the best thing for the patient in ordering the test. It's a complex dynamic of the physician decision-making and what the patient wants. But again, the conversation is key. So, for example, when I see patients all the time who come in and bang their heads, often they're younger kids playing soccer, let's say, and you're talking to the parents, if you take the time to have the conversation and say, look, really based on the symptoms that your child has or that you have, you really don't need the scan. We're not going to do it for the following reasons, because it won't be helpful or be harmful in the following ways. The vast majority of patients are actually grateful to not have the test.
So they don't demand the CT scan anyway?
It's very rare. It's very rare, I will say.
Give us an example, Dr. Levinson, of where an unnecessary test can actually be injurious to a patient's health.
Sure. I think one of the things that people think is that more is always better. We kind of have that in society in general, so they think the same applies to healthcare. But in fact, what's important is that sometimes if you have a test that isn't needed, so let me give you an example. You have a chest x-ray and it's just sort of routine, and they see a little nodule, a little abnormality, and so then they need to do a CT scan, which has excess radiation, and that increases lifetime risk of cancer. So you get a CT scan, and then it isn't quite sure, and they say, well, we better repeat that in a month, and you get another one, and then they say, well, we're still worried about that. We better do a needle biopsy, where they do something invasive. And so you get in what we call a cascade of tests that lead you down the road from an original test that wasn't needed. That's the problem. That's a harm from a test.
But what is that nodule in the first place, though?
Well, often there are little things that are just routinely found that aren't meaningful, and so you chase them unnecessarily. And that really happens a lot if you do 20 blood tests, which we do, these batteries of blood tests, it's common that one of them is abnormal just from statistical abnormality. And so again, you can have harm, not to mention the inconvenience of time off work, or discomfort from tests, or stress from tests, worrying about whether the results are positive. So you clearly want these things when you need them, but you want to avoid them if you don't need them, and more is not always better.
What about false positives? How frequent are those?
It really depends on the situation and the test. So it's not, there's no one answer to that. It's very test dependent.
Go ahead. The interesting thing about that example, too, is that the patient may feel, in fact, that having had a chest x-ray that they didn't really need, and then having a CT scan because of a false positive, and maybe even going on to have a biopsy, I mean, assuming that they don't have some disaster as a result of the biopsy and so on, they may feel that they've had fantastic care. They may think I have the best doctor ever because he or she saw something and they really looked into it and now I'm okay. Whereas if they'd never had the chest x-ray in the first place, they wouldn't have had to go through any of that and would still be okay. So it's interesting how the dynamic can be that you can look like you're being a really good doctor. And in fact, these are doctors who are trying to do a really good job when they're doing these tests. But at the end of the day, you're actually not doing anybody any favors and you're costing the system resources and money that could be better spent elsewhere.
Let me follow up on that without trying to seem too personal. When did you go to med school? What years?
I finished in 1988.
1988. Okay,
long
that's
time
almost 30 years ago. How about that? All right.
My 30th reunion is coming up.
I'm willing to bet that back in 1988 when you went to med school, over-testing and doing as much as possible was all part of the training you received, right?
It was not at all on the radar screen. To be honest with you, it was much harder then to get things like a CT scan because of the availability. But absolutely, no, this was not. This would be considered best practice to
So you're
test.
looking at a big culture change for a lot of doctors, who may have been in the field for more than 10, 15 years here, to do things very differently from the way they've always done them. How possible is that?
Oh, I think it's very possible. I think that it's happening already. I mean, I think that's the success of choosing wisely and just training in general, which is emphasizing more and more the why are you doing that test philosophy. And even though my training was a few years ago, certainly I can recall some of my best teachers saying, well, why do you want to order that test? And that's the question I ask trainees now that I'm training, is to say, so you want to order that blood test or that CT scan, how is the result going to change what you're going to do? And so often the answer is it won't. And then we say, well, why are we doing the test?
From Tommy to David, Ed, Audrey, Alexa, Jack, and Tom, and today, to all of us, we are the party that is building a better Canada. It is us. And it is in us. And it is in us that you can see the future of our country, how great our country will be with a new democratic government.
Jagmeet Singh's victory speech. Let's now, Sheldon, bring up the results because it only took one ballot. Look at the number on the right-hand side. He got more than 50% of the votes. On the first ballot, Charlie Angus, Nikki Ashton, Guy Caron, all much further back than any of them had anticipated. Peggy Nash, how surprised are you that Singh got it and won?
Well, the Singh camp seemed pretty confident. I was there that Sunday, and they had a lot of confidence. But still, when the numbers were read, you could see the surprise and the joy that was expressed. So that's how Jack Layton won when he became leader, and it just gets the party on a great footing. It just resets everything.
You sat with him in caucus, so you maybe know him a little better than the rest of us around this table.
Yes, quite well, and it was a Jagmeet juggernaut of a campaign, a phenomenal organized. Yeah, absolutely. It was a phenomenal organizational effort, and right from the beginning, his team was saying we're going to win this, and it seemed pretty cocky at the time, but obviously they were right.
What do you think the one ballot victory suggests?
I think it suggests that the NDP definitely wants to go in a new direction with the party. And they definitely want to attract racialized voters. They want to expand the suburban vote, their vote in urban cities. And what Peggy Nash had mentioned in terms of, even though the campaign knew that they were probably going to win, but there was still some excitement there, was because it was a hard campaign, right? There was a lot of hurdles that the Jagmeet Singh campaign had to face along the way. It was a long campaign. There was a lot of challenges. There was a lot of, sometimes tension between the candidates. candidate. So I think it's kind of a breath of fresh air, you know, when you win such a huge race like this.
Hadiya, your view on the overwhelming nature of his victory?
I think it's inspiring. So when I spoke to him a few weeks ago, I was afraid. I was afraid that Canada wasn't ready for someone who wasn't a white man. And it's nice and refreshing to see that it seems like we are.
I wonder whether we have to revisit that thing. I mean, there is an openly gay grandmother who is the Premier of Ontario. We have a gay Premier in Prince Edward Island. We now have a South Asian leading a major political party. Maybe we're readier than a lot of folks think we are?
I mean, if you look at the US, right, we thought we were ready for the first female president, and you know,
that was a more complicated question.
Yes. Yeah. But sometimes I want to think the best in people, but I am a Black woman who has lived a Black female life, and so I know the reality can sometimes be different.
Rick, you're not a Black woman. You have not lived a Black female life. You want to tell us about
I'm
what
a 6'6"
white man,
you know, straight white guy.
Exactly.
And this may shock you, but I'm not the most emotional guy in the world. And you caught a little clip of my two sons and my wife and I at the back of that room last Sunday. And I was really emotional when he won. And I gave my sons a big hug. I think they were kind of shocked. Like my little guy was kind of tugging on my sleeve. I'm not sure he's ever seen me cry before, to be honest. And it was a wonderful moment. And I think my kids will remember that moment for the rest of their lives. And I'm really proud. I'm proud of the NDP for making that convincing choice. I'm delighted for my friends in the Jagmeet Singh camp and for the other great candidates.
Who was around
it was a wonderful,
him,
wonderful moment.
All those young people, the diversity of the folks who were sitting with him and the people who came up on stage. And he talked about this is the future of Canada. And just demographically, it's the future of Canada. So I thought it was a very powerful statement.
Absolutely. Just to add on to that, I think there's going to be a whole new generation of political leaders that are going to come after this. I know, just speaking to a lot of people who are looking to run in the provincial election upcoming, people who are now looking to be political active are young racialized people who are partly now involved in party politics because of Jagmeet. So I think what's really important for us to recognize is what this is doing to transform or shift the Canadian political climate, and who can actually be involved or who can actually participate and be seen as a front figure within politics.
Well, my job is to play killjoy at this part, because Cheri, you know from being in politics as long as you have, he's never going to be more popular or have a better day in politics than the one he just experienced. But now comes the heavy lifting.
Well, first of all, you know, Trudeau is now the oldest leader of a political party. So that's
major political party.
So yeah, so Jagmeet has a lot of time on his side, and I think that's important. He also has a really re-energized party that's going to keep his feet to the fire from within, as well as a media, a world media, that's really scrutinizing him from the outside.
Let's get you to characterize the role that you think local business interests have played in the rise to power of jihadist groups. How would you characterize it?
Well, first and foremost, what I'll say is that the business class, when they end up in bed with Islamists, it's a marriage of convenience. And to really understand why this happens, we need to have a sense of what it means to do business in a conflict zone. So take a look at a place like Afghanistan or Somalia or Mali, where there's a tremendous amount of ethnic and tribal conflict. That means that my group and your group are killing each other, and we don't have any place to do business with each other. But what if I want to sell sugar in your district? That means that I either can't, or it's going to end up being very costly for me, because that means I need a local partner in each turf, in each ethnic or tribal turf. There's a huge amount of distrust between us. The costs of this are very, very high. And so this is both a prohibitive business environment, but at the same time, there are such tremendous opportunities. When the state fails and there is no rule of law, a lot of things become possible.
So what do you need from me and what do I need from you if we're playing out this scenario?
Well, the first thing I need to know is that you're trustworthy. And so that if I try to sell my goods in your turf and you're like, don't worry, Aisha, I've got you, you're gonna get your cut, you deliver your goods to this place and I've got you. I need to know that you're not, because you're from my rival ethnic group, that you're not gonna cheat me. Now, when there is no government to guarantee transactions, I need some kind of social currency that can allow me to build trust between me and a rival from a group that I otherwise hate.
And what is it in this case?
In this case, and in cases across the world, you see that the social capital comes from religion. So if we share a common Islamic identity, and you can demonstrate to me that you have some religious credentials, that mitigates my fear.
But as a business person, okay, maybe we should take this out from the realm of the two of us, but sure, the business people don't believe in the kind of Islam that IS represents.
This is absolutely true, but I'm not suggesting that the business people at this stage are buying into an Islamist agenda. What I'm saying is that over a long period of time, the business community does in fact lean on Islamic identity as a form of trust. So, if there is a person who, one of the heads of the Islamic Courts Union in Somalia told me that, look, if there's a person who's chewing khat, smoking cigarettes, looks like he's, barely sober for that moment, and then there's another person in a stall next to them who has a clean beard, who looks like they're a very religious person. Who do you think is going to cheat you?
Yeah.
And so this information shortcut plays out over time, and the business community ends up adopting this Islamic identity, both to build trust across factional lines and also to secure business deals that they otherwise wouldn't.
Okay, conversely, the Islamic State warriors certainly have no interest in the kind of lifestyle that the business people are leading. So what's in it for them?
See, now that's the second part of the story. Now, what I'm saying in terms of the Islamicization of the business community, that happens long before the Islamists actually show up on the scene. And so the idea that the business class are going to try to present themselves as having some sort of Islamic identity happens long before any jihadists show up and try to tap into that social capital. But this is how the jihadists do tap into it in such a way that gives them an opportunity. And it's highly strategic. Now, as I mentioned, if I'm from one ethnic group and you're from another, the taxes that I end up paying just to do business get really, really high. Because in an ethnically or tribally fragmented civil war, all of the protection rackets, all of the security arrangements are run by warlords who are representing their sub-state group. They're representing the Pashtuns, they're representing the Tajiks, they're representing the Hawiya. And so I can buy protection from my group, but if I want to sell into another, I got to buy double protection, have a partner there. That gets expensive. Here's where the Islamists can come in and offer a simple, single-payer tax system across factional lines.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, October 13th, 2017. Happy Triskaidekaphobia Day, everybody. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety at tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and thanks to our nightly Twitter live stream on our Periscope page. That's periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.